Alright, talking about butterfly guard this month, starting with our basic butterfly techniques. These are your building blocks of butterfly guard. Starting with basic position, I have my feet inside and my knees nice and wide. Let's begin then with our over-under sweep from butterfly guard. Looks like this. Over-under butterfly sweep. Alright, step by step. From my butterfly guard, I begin by grabbing over-under grips. Most important thing here is that my overhook is not over my opponent's shoulder, that it is in fact over their tricep. Step number 2, making sure I don't fall backwards, I'm going to tip over to my shoulder down. Step number 3, I lift with my opposite hook. Step number 4, I sweep, putting my opponent's back on the floor. And step number 5, surfacing to mount. One more time. Okay, next up we have our double overhook sweep from butterfly guard, another fundamental building block of any good butterfly guard. The double over sweep is particularly important for self-defense because it prevents my opponent from punching me. If I hold Coach Nick's arms within double overhooks, it is very, very difficult for Coach Nick to reach back and punch me in the face. Now, I'll show you what the sweep looks like. Step by step, starting with my double overhooks. Again, a common error here is that my overhooks are below the elbows, making it very easy for my opponent to simply pull his hands away. I want to make sure my overhooks are well above the elbows and my elbows are pinched. Now, if Coach Nick attempts to extract his arms, they are stuck. Now, step number 2, just like before, I'm going to go shoulder down to the mat. Step number 3, I lift just as before. Step number 4, I sweep. Step number 5, coming all the way up to mount. Next up, we have our shoulder crunch sweep from butterfly for the youth. Shoulder crunch sweep looks like this, starting with an underhook. One more time, shoulder crunch sweep, this time step by step. Step number 1, I get an underhook. Step number 2, I make a meatball grip over my partner's shoulder. Step number 3, I shoulder crunch, bringing his shoulder down to my chest. We mentioned in class that it's very, very important that I keep Coach Nick's elbow above my shoulder. If his arm does slip into the crook of my arm, I will have to adjust because now Coach Nick can post. If I sweep him now, he can post. Instead, I want his elbow right up on my shoulder. Now I go back, I push away, and I hook sweep towards the crunch. One last time. So, next up, we have a technique dealing with a particularly defensive opponent. If our opponent decides to sit all the way back on his heels and not allow me to engage in overhooks, underhooks, or my shoulder crunch, I will now proceed to snap my opponent down. This is for both groups. Step number 1, I make a collar grip. Step number 2, I post. Step number 3, making sure I lift my butt, I withdraw my knee to Captain Morgan. Step number 4, snap my opponent away from me. And step number 5, I make sure I cover chest to back. One last time. Now, for the juniors, I have one more technique following up from our snap down. From my cover, we talked about a brand new position this month, back mount. I'll show you what the back mount sequence looks like, and then we'll talk through it step by step. Back mount from your cover. from my cover. Step number 1, I place 2 hands on the shoulders. I keep weight on my opponent. I'm going to jump over and put in both hooks. Step number 2, as opposed to back control, where I grab my seatbelt, I will instead grab double underhooks underneath my opponent's arms. Step number 3, once I've secured my double underhooks and my leg hooks, I'm going to sprawl directly into my opponent. This will collapse Coach Nick. And then finally, I will remove my hands for back mount. Sitting up nice and tall, I can use my hands to attack or keep Coach Nick flat. One last time. Starting from my cover,